All of it began on a calm afternoon. Mia Thompson here, and at 28, I felt as if my life was already running on autopilot. Working for a small marketing company, I managed accounts and handled daily routines, the same clients and the same reports. Most of my days were spent fixated on a screen, working through issues that, in the big picture, hardly mattered all that much. I lived alone in a small flat in the city. It was not a horrible existence, but it was nothing unique either. Companions? I had a few, although we were not precisely close. My social circle now resembled an acquaintance network more than anything else, nobody I confided in or felt really close to me. I recall clearly that Thursday afternoon was when everything changed. I had grown so used to being alone that it felt natural. Usually my haunt, I was seated in a coffee shop. The location offered the ideal balance of silence and vitality, the kind of environment that let me concentrate but nevertheless occasionally caused diversion. Before me was a cappuccino with steam rising from the frothy top. My laptop was open with a spreadsheet I was furiously attempting to understand. The figures didn't match up, but I persisted, too stubborn to acknowledge loss. Then he entered under the name Lucas. Later on, I discovered he was 33, a few years my senior, but at that time I had no idea who he was. All I knew was that everything else vanished from view as he passed through the door. I have no idea exactly what it was about him. Though he was not very beautiful, his manner exuded a compelling quality. Confident without being haughty, a little tough around the margins, yet polished enough to seem like he fit in a business environment. I tried not to stare, but of course I couldn't help it as he turned away after glancing about the room and focused on me for just a split second. I knew him already in a manner I couldn't articulate. He stood there waiting after ordering a coffee at the counter. There were lots of empty seats and not a packed time of day. I froze when he moved directly near the table where I was seated, though for some reason without asking. I didn't know what to do. Was he absent? Was I someone else, he thought? Was this some kind of strange accident? Mind if I come with you? His voice was warm, slow, and steady. He was more like presenting a truth than seeking permission. And yet, I didn't mind. Sure, I said, not sure why I wasn't protesting. Lucas grinned and slanted back in his chair with his coffee cup between his palms. He seemed not hurried and not to have any place else to be. He seemed to have all the time on earth. He peered at my laptop screen. Work stuff? He questioned, pointing to the figures I still found difficult. I nodded, a little self-consciously. Actually, I'm merely trying to understand these spreadsheets. It's something of a mess. I'm good with numbers, he added, as if it were the most laid-back thing in the world. Mind if I look at this? I stopped. Usually I would have turned down the offer, especially from a total stranger, but something about his presence caused me second thoughts. Sure, I answered, gently pulling the laptop a bit closer to him. He exuded a serene confidence that was curiously comforting. I'm just trying to find out why these estimates contradict one another. Lucas bent over and peered at the screen, maybe spotting something I missed. His eyebrows wrinkled slightly as he examined the figures as his eyes flew rapidly over the data. He seemed not hurried or annoyed. He whispered, tapping a finger on the keyboard, almost as though he was enjoying the challenge. Your assumptions lack a few fundamental variables, and you have a formula error here. I blinked, a bit ashamed, and everything will be thrown off. Of course, it was really basic. The figures were so complicated that I had missed the obvious. I should have seen that, I laughed softly. He grinned, his eyes creasing at the corners, saying, I've been staring at this for hours and couldn't figure it out. It comes naturally to the finest among us. Sometimes you just need a new set of eyes. I was still a little shocked that he had just sat down and fixed my problem as though it were nothing. He exuded a calmness akin to that which he had experienced 1,000 times before. I wasn't ready to let the discussion die just yet, though, so... What do you do? I inquired, hoping to change the subject from my embarrassing error. He stopped momentarily, as if considering how much he wanted to disclose. I'm a consultant, he added at last, in a still casual manner. I basically help businesses make their processes run smoother. That is, on efficiency and operations. I nodded, intrigued. Sounds intriguing. You have to deal with many various sectors. Yeah, he murmured, slinking slightly back. I see a lot of behind-the-scenes material most people never get access to. Actually, it's fascinating. Although every company has different difficulties, the main ones are usually the same. I was beginning to feel a little more at ease, the first uneasiness of our meeting disappearing. We discussed work for a few more minutes, discussing how his job resembled mine in some respects, but also quite different in others. We developed an odd friendship, whereby we felt as though we were two people who just happened to find themselves in the same place discussing the things that meant most to us. Suddenly, though, he offered a question that caught me off guard. So, Mia, what do you really want to be doing with your life? His gaze locked on mine in a way that made my pulse skip a beat. The question seemed large and unexpected, weighty. For years, I had been avoiding the kind of inquiry this one begged. I opened my lips to respond, but nothing came out. The type of question I never even let myself consider as I was too afraid of the response. Lucas regarded me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, but not in a negative sense. For a second, I froze, trying to figure out how to respond to something I didn't even know the answer to. He seemed to be waiting for me to uncover the truth buried within of me. A few seconds later, he grinned gently, almost as if he knew, then murmured, "Don't worry. You not have to have everything sorted out right now. When you do, though, you'll know." I was left staring at him, wondering whether I would have just found someone who could really help me sort it out. The idea captivated as much as it worried me. Until it was already out there, I had not realized how much I needed someone to ask that question. I had no idea what to say to Lucas following that. Though his inquiry was straightforward enough, it touched me more than I anticipated. Since, to be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted, I wasn't sure how to respond. Do you ever feel like you're caught in a loop? I had been on autopilot for so long that I'd forgotten what it was like to genuinely think about what made me happy. I blurted out, the words flying before I could stop them. Though I wasn't sure what I meant by it, it felt right. Lucas leaned back in his chair, sipping his coffee slowly, and then looked at me deliberately. "I think everyone feels like that sometimes," he remarked, gently laying down the cup. His words hung in the air between us, and I felt a rush of something, probably relief, maybe unease, sweep over me. "You decide how long you stay in the loop, though." People speaking so candidly and honestly was not something I was used to. When I asked folks how they were doing most of the time, I usually heard the usual, "Good, how about you?" answer, the sort of casual conversation that never really took off. But working with Lucas felt different. Though I couldn't really pinpoint it, there was something more to this talk. I fidgeted with my pen, whirling it between my fingers, trying to find anything to say. I was not used to being vulnerable to total strangers. The fact was, I wasn't even sure I wanted to. "Sorry, suddenly feeling self-conscious," I muttered. Lucas answered, his voice cool and reassuring. "I didn't mean to dump all that on you. No need to apologize. Sometimes we just need to say things aloud for our own hearing." I nodded, though I wasn't really sure what it was he understood. Perhaps he was being courteous, or perhaps he had seen individuals like me, people caught in routines unsure of their direction in life. I was unsure. "So, what about you?" Trying to veer the conversation away from my own uncertainties, I asked, "How came you to be doing what you do? Consulting, I mean." Lucas nodded slightly, as though he was considering how to explain it. "It wasn't something I planned," he said after a beat. "Like many others, I began my career in business. Although I spent some time working in a corporate job, it never felt satisfying. It did not excite me. I thus began side consulting for small companies seeking guidance on streamlining their operations. One thing led to another, and then I went full-time with it. Although it wasn't something he had first intended, I could sense the real delight in his voice as he spoke his job. Though it wasn't what he had first anticipated for himself, I felt a flutter of jealousy. He seemed to have discovered his thing. "I guess that's kind of what I'm missing, more to myself than to him," I remarked. Lucas arched an eyebrow and his eyes softened. "I don't even know what I'm passionate about anymore." "That's good. One sometimes needs time to sort it out. Try not to hurry it. You will locate it when you get ready." I barely smiled. Though that wasn't quite the advice I was expecting, it was better than the typical platitudes I'd come across over the years. "I hope you're right," I responded softly. The chat veered for a few minutes between lighthearted small talk and more introspection about my career background, how I'd always felt like I was capable of more but never knew how to start something greater. I found myself disclosing things I hadn't meant to. He did not try to address my difficulties or give unwanted advice or interrupt. Before I knew it, an hour had gone by. He simply listened. It was something I hadn't realized I needed until that very moment. I knew I had to return to work as the coffee shop was beginning to fill once more. I looked at my watch, then back at Lucas, who appeared to be not rushing to leave. "Looks like I've got to go," I replied, getting up and grabbing my stuff. "I'm quite happy we spoke. Thank you for everything." Well, all. Though surprising, it was in a positive sense. Lucas stood up too, looking serious. "Nothing wrong here. If you ever need help with your numbers or if you just want to grab coffee again, let me know," he said, reaching into his pocket and handing me a card. I took the card without thinking, my fingers brushing against his for just a moment. Something about the way he handed me the card made me feel as though this wasn't merely some friendly trade. It had a specific weight. I wasn't sure if he knew anything I didn't know or if he really wanted to help. Either way, I put the card in my bag and remarked, "I'll keep that in mind," smiling but not knowing if I would ever use it. I was not used to requesting assistance, hence the thought of getting in touch with him felt odd, but something advised me I should at least give it some thought. Lucas nodded, gave me one more look before heading for the door. "Mia, take care, and remember, don't allow yourself stay stuck." As I watched him go, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of appreciation and uncertainty. It had only been an hour, yet I felt as though the course of my day, perhaps even my life, had been subtly changed during our chat. Though I knew it had been significant, I wasn't sure exactly what I should take from it. I slumped back down at my table, staring at my laptop, the statistics still open on the screen. Though I still had a lot of work ahead of me, I wasn't sure exactly about everything for the first time in a while. Lucas had caused me to consider things I had been avoiding, and even if I hadn't worked out everything, I felt lighter. Funny, like something had opened out in me just a little. Expecting nothing more than another typical day of work, I entered that coffee shop, but left with something unexpected, the first hint of change. The remainder of the day seemed to have blended together. Though I had meetings, reports to do, and a big email list to respond to, my mind kept returning to the coffee shop. To Lucas, I couldn't help but keep turning over and over the talk in my brain. I considered his listening to me, his seeming ease with himself, as if he had everything under control. The issue was, I had never been one to believe in serendipity. It was not that he was perfect or some sort of life guru. There was something about him that felt grounded, like he possessed insight I did not. I was not someone who believed random meetings had greater significance or that events had a purpose. But that day felt more than just chance. Sitting across from a total stranger asking questions I had never asked myself felt like more than just chance. Meeting Lucas felt like an invitation to think bigger, to challenge the way I had been living my life. I couldn't get rid of the sensation that meeting Lucas had cracked open something inside me, something I had buried behind layers of habit and complacency years before. That evening, I sat in front of my apartment window, looked out at the city lights below, and asked, for the first time in a long time, whether it was time to let it out. Though the typical evening bustle crowded the streets, everything felt less than normal. Pulling out the card Lucas had given me, I turned it over in my hands and felt the buzz of the city seem far away, like I was hearing through a cloud. Lucas Harding is a business consultant. Along with a phone number and email address, that was all it said. I had not yet decided what I would do with it, but the more I considered it, the more I came to see. I wanted to leave where I was. I wasn't sure exactly Lucas could do for me. I didn't want to wake up in another year, another 5 years, and still be wondering what I was doing with my life. Perhaps he could assist me with some of the pragmatic issues, such as improving my control of my work-life balance. I didn't know. Perhaps he had ideas about the most important questions, the ones hovering over me for years unmet. but I began to consider whether it might be worth getting in touch to learn more. The next morning, I found myself at my desk, staring at the card once more, a cup of coffee in hand. Perhaps he would have some responses, or at least send me in the right path. I didn't want to sound desperate. I wasn't sure what the hell I would even say, and I had a million excuses not to contact him. She was a stranger. I opened my email and quickly scribbled a brief response. "Hi, Lucas. I hope this message finds you well." For some reason, none of those seemed strong enough to stop me. Mia is the woman you met yesterday at the coffee shop. After some thought about our conversation, I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. If you're open to it, I would love to discuss further what you do and see if there is any way I may use your advice. It was unexpected, but appreciated. Best, Mia. I gazed at the screen for a second, then clicked send before I could overthink it. Tell me whether you would be free to chat sometime this week. I felt a little lighter as soon as it left my email, as though I had just taken a little but significant step toward something. What precisely I wasn't sure of, but it seemed like development. That afternoon, the email alert pinged. His response surprised me greatly. "Hi, Mia. Thanks for getting in touch. That our chat had an impact makes me happy. I would be quite willing to talk more. If that works for you, I have some time tomorrow afternoon. Best, Lucas." I read the message 3 times, then looked into my calendar to see if it would match your schedule. Early tomorrow afternoon. I could get that to work. Though I was beginning to get a little uneasy, I refused to let myself back off. Clicking reply, I verified a time. The appointment was established. The next day, I discovered myself pacing my flat 1 hour before our planned call. I had no notion what to expect, what precisely I was hoping to receive out of this chat. Really, how much could a consultant actually assist me in resolving? It was not like I was a company owner with large decisions on balance. Still, I couldn't get rid of the impression that talking to Lucas once more would somehow get me unstuck. My phone rang at 2 o'clock. I stopped momentarily, inhaled deeply, then snatched it up. "Hello?" Though I pushed past it, my voice felt too loud, too eager. "Mia," Lucas spoke in a smooth, quiet, instantly recognized tone. "Lucas is here. How are you?" I worked myself to unwind and sank into my chair. "Good, thanks. What about you?" "Thanks. I'm doing well," he answered. "What then is on your mind?" "You stated you wanted to discuss your career and where you are in life more broadly." I listened carefully. I stopped, not sure how to even begin. Though I wanted to say so much, none of it seemed logical or orderly. "Well, I guess," I said, running a hand through my hair. "Not sure. I just feel caught. Though I go through the routines of my work and life, I don't truly feel attached to them." I could hear the subdued comprehension in his voice when he answered, like something is missing, but I'm not sure what that is. I understand. One is not unusual in feeling that way. Many people occupy that area of just doing what they believe they should be doing instead of what they really wish to do. What then, from your intuition, makes sense? What seems out of line? I paused. I'm unsure. I suppose that is just everything. Lucas's tone softened. I'm not sure if I'm in the proper position, if I'm living in the appropriate place, or if I'm doing anything really significant. That is a rather important issue, and I believe it's reasonable to not know the solution right now. You're asking it, which is really significant. You're prepared to acknowledge that something has to be changed. Most individuals cannot even accomplish that. His comments really stung more than I had anticipated. "You're right," I murmured, my voice hardly audible above a whisper, as he seemed to be validating everything I had been feeling but too terrified to express aloud. I had been too terrified to own it. Perhaps, though, it is time for a change. "Exactly," he remarked, sounding more like a mentor than a stranger now, and transformation need not be grand or spectacular. Sometimes it's just about being receptive to fresh opportunities, even if they seem little at first. As I listened to him, I sensed something change in me. I felt less alone in the questions I asked for the first time in a long period. It seemed as though others had also experienced uncertainty or loss. I was not the only one. Lucas was not providing short fixes or simple solutions. We spoke for another half hour, the conversation flowing naturally, and at the end I felt lighter, like a weight had been taken off my chest. He was offering something better, permission to think differently, to let me be uncertain, and to welcome the idea that I may change. The days following my call with Lucas passed by in a flurry. I wasn't sure precisely what my next steps were, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared to take them. I went through the motions of employment, but my thoughts kept returning to our talk. It was more than just his counsel. It was the way he had heard me. I felt for the first time in a long time not like I was merely another person caught in the grind. The more I considered what Lucas had said, that change didn't have to be large, that it was all right to start small, the more I understood he was right. Even though I didn't know precisely what that was yet, perhaps I was spared having to make any huge, life-altering decisions overnight. The thing about being caught is perhaps all I needed to do was take one tiny step to start myself in a different direction. You do not always require a thorough makeover. Sometimes all it takes is a minor change, a little prod to get you out of your own thoughts. The next week, I decided to follow Lucas's advice and do something that felt like a little change, but had the potential to have a significant impact. I had been holding myself back, not because I couldn't move forward, but rather because I hadn't let myself try moving. I had been considering it for some time, engaging in something fresh outside of the office. Though I have always loved writing, I never took it very seriously. When I wanted a vacation from the world, I persuaded myself that it was only a hobby, nothing more than a means of passing time. But suppose it could be more. After a demanding day at the office, Monday evening I sat down at my desk, opened a blank Word document, and began typing. It was only a few ideas, a few phrases stitched together, not anything particularly noteworthy. But it felt great. The words came naturally at first, then slowed, then stopped. It felt like I was allowing myself to investigate something that had always been there, buried in the rear of my mind. Though I was only working on a few paragraphs, not a novel, I still felt as though I was acting daring. I had turned away from the predictable and done something just for me for the first time in months. Not because it was practical, not because it would make me money or look good on a resume, but because it made me feel something. And that was all I needed, emotion. I emailed Lucas once more the next morning. Though I wasn't sure if it was the correct thing to do, it seemed like the perfect moment to seek his direction. Hi, Lucas. I hope you're doing well. We had discussed broad ideas before, but I had to go more practically, something tangible. After giving our chat more thought, I decided to pick back up writing. I used to enjoy it, but I've always put it aside for one reason or another. I wanted to ask, do you think it's worth pursuing? I'm not sure where it's heading yet. Alternatively, should I follow what I know and concentrate on my career? Thank you very much for your time. Mia, I clicked submit before I could second-guess myself. I'm still working things out. Though it seemed vulnerable, it was a modest request. Sharing something so intimate felt almost like a risk, opening up to him. But I would like to know. The response came fast, as it always does with Lucas. Hey Mia, I'm really happy to hear you decided to write once more. I wanted to hear his opinions, especially as I wasn't sure if this whole writing thing was just a passing phase or if it could possibly be something worth pursuing. That is rather large. The trouble with writing, or with anything, is that it's not about whether or not it's the right decision or the smart one. It relates to whether it makes you happy and fulfilled. Even if you're not sure where it will lead, if writing makes you feel alive, it's worth pursuing. There is no such thing as a perfect decision. Regarding your career, I wouldn't say you have to pick one over the other. You are free to start small, explore, and see where it leads you. One can find room for both. You can pursue the things that brighten your life even while you are good at your employment. Remember, Mia, taking the initial step is frequently the toughest part of life. It is not an either-or dilemma. Best, Lucas. I stared at his message for a little, letting the words sink in. Once you've done that, the rest will follow. Keep me informed. I hadn't even paused to ask myself what I wanted to do. I had been so preoccupied with what I should do and worried with the rational, pragmatic side of things. If living a life that appeared excellent on paper did not make me feel anything, then what was the point of living? Lucas was correct. My profession and my passion were not anything I had to choose between. I was able to have both, It wasn't either or. Hence, that evening I sat down once more and kept writing. Though slowly, the words started to flow steadily. In the days that followed, I found myself scheduling time for writing each evening, even if it was just for 1 hour. Some were untidy, some incomplete, but every phrase seemed like a step in the right direction. Though I wasn't trying to pursue a profession from it yet, I was allowing myself to investigate it in a manner I hadn't given myself in years, and that, in and of itself, seemed like development. It was not easy, and it did not always feel like flawless sailing. There were times when I questioned myself and wondered if I was squandering time or acting stupidly. But I reminded myself of what Lucas had said, that the toughest part is starting every time those questions surfaced. And I had done that. I was still working things out and not sure where all this would lead. But I was not terrified of not knowing all the answers for the first time in a very long time. I was ready for the ambiguity. Though it occurred in little, silent increments, I was open to the idea that real change was possible. The next few weeks felt like a slow but consistent unraveling. I was learning how to let go of the strain I had put on myself to have things all out, how to trust myself once more. I had always been the kind of person who yearned for a straight road, for precise knowledge of my direction and means of arrival. But as I wrote more and gave more thought to what I really desired, I came to see that the road did not have to be so straightforward. Writing was starting to occupy more of my life, not only in a let's try this out for a few weeks kind of manner. There was beauty in the uncertainty, in the effort of discovering what could be instead of just focusing on what should be. Every evening after work and occasionally on weekends when I could escape the regular responsibilities, I was beginning to schedule time for it. Though I was not intending to publish anything or write a novel, I was letting the words flow. It tasted fantastic, like my mind had room to breathe again, to stretch beyond the boundaries of spreadsheets and email threads. I started writing about everything. My childhood memories, observations about the people I saw in the city, events that stayed with me, little ideas never found expression before. Though some of it was introspective and some personal, all of it felt authentic. Approval was not needed, nor was there pressure to wow anyone. It was only the page and me. That was plenty. However, I had to acknowledge to myself I was still holding back even though I was enjoying writing. Not yet. I wasn't ready to show it to anyone. It felt too raw, too intimate, and part of me still dreaded scrutiny. What would happen if people failed to understand? Suppose they disagreed with what I produced. For now, I thus kept it to myself. One evening, a few weeks after our last email, I got another from Lucas. I kept notebooks full of haphazard ideas, wrote down bits of ideas that came to me, and typed late into my laptop when the world outside my window was quiet. Though I could tell he was checking in, something I valued more than I let on, it was casual. "Hi, Mia. Just wanted to see how you were doing with the writing. Are you still allowing time for it, and how is life, work, and all that other stuff? Best, Lucas." I grinned when I received the post. Hope all is moving in your favor. Lucas's check-ins had a certain soft push quality that reminded me that I wasn't alone on my self-discovery trip. He was not motivating me to be anything I lacked. He was not demanding reports or pushing me to produce something significant from my work. "Hey, Lucas, thanks for checking in." I sat down to respond, and for the first time, felt like I had something substantial to say. He simply wanted to know whether I was still making room for the things that meant something to me. Indeed, I am still in development. I'm writing more than I have in years, really. Though I'm still sorting things out, it seems right even though it's slow. I'm learning to release the need to make things flawless or anything at all. Just let it be what it is. Employment is good. The same old, the same old. Though I'm not sure what this writing thing is going to develop into yet, I'm allowing myself to investigate since I have been feeling a little different lately. Like I'm genuinely creating room for the things I care about, not just the ones I should care about. Definitely keep you informed. Hope all is good with you too. Best, Mia. I did not expect a response straight away, but when it came, I was happy to hear from him once more. Would love to know how things are on your end. Though brief, his answer felt hopeful. "Hey, Mia, it's great to know you still find time for writing." That's big. not only with the writing, but also with the way you're letting yourself let go of the shoulds and begin living for yourself. You are not allowing the correct path to determine your emotions or behavior. That's strong. Keep at it even if it's just a small daily increment. Concern yourself not with where it is headed yet. Just let it develop. Take care. I'm looking forward to hearing more about how it turns out. Best? Lucas's words stayed with me in a way that seemed affirming. He was not pressing me to make any significant jumps or guiding me in what to do. He was only telling me that right now I was on my own road, and that one does not have to follow the path of others. And slowly, I started to feel like maybe I was ready for it. But it was not only the writing that was changing, it was also my time to believe that whatever came next would come when it was right. I was beginning to approach my life in general subtly differently. I stopped at work overcomplicating things. I gave up trying to be perfect or obsessing over every little detail. Taking breaks made me more at ease. It gave me permission to stand back and reassess. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with things I had ignored. I had been so used to pushing myself to the brink, but now I let myself have moments of calm, times to breathe. I went for walks in the park, spent hours reading books I had intended to get for years, and even caught up with a few old acquaintances I had lost touch with. Though not spectacular, it was real. A few months later, I decided to take a little but important action. I turned in a short story to a local literary magazine. For the first time in decades, I felt like I was creating a life that really belonged to me. Though little, it was sufficient to cause my heart to race. I didn't know what would happen after I clicked send, but the fact that I was doing it at all felt like a success. As I sat back after publishing the tale, I understood something crucial. I didn't need affirmation to make it real, or for someone else to tell me I was good enough. I had already given myself license to begin, and it was plenty more than required. Story 2. This story is titled Sister-in-Law Called The Cops on Me, so I refused to babysit her kids, and now her life is falling apart. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. For years, my sister-in-law, Sarah, and I had a babysitting arrangement that worked perfectly. We started it back in March 2020, when the pandemic screwed everyone's lives over. She'd watch my kids 3 days a week, and I'd watch hers 3 days. No money exchanged hands, no drama, no bullshit. It was a win-win. And for 3 solid years, we kept it running smoothly. If something came up, we'd give each other plenty of notice, like mature adults. Then Sarah decided to throw all that out the goddamn window over one stupid argument. A couple of weeks ago, we had this petty disagreement. I can't even remember what it was about. It was that insignificant. But apparently Sarah took it personally. I figured she'd cool off after a day, so I didn't dwell on it. The next morning, I dropped my kids off at her place like I'd done 100 times before. I didn't even go inside. That wasn't unusual for us. If one of us was in a rush or just not feeling social, we'd stay in the car, let the kids go inside, and drive off once the door opened. I didn't think twice about it. I waved at her door when I saw it open, and then I headed to work. My commute is about 40 minutes, so I just zoned out to music, totally unaware that shit was about to hit the fan. When I finally got to work and checked my phone, my stomach dropped. I had 20 missed calls and a ton of texts, all from Sarah. The text started off with her saying she wasn't watching my kids that day because of our argument. Then the tone shifted to her bitching about me ignoring her. The last few messages were her threatening to call the police if I didn't pick up my kids within 45 minutes. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I called her immediately, apologizing for not seeing her messages sooner. I explained that my phone was on silent while I drove. You know, because I'm not a moron who texts and drives. I told her I'd leave work early and come get the kids, but she cut me off. "You've got 45 minutes or I'm calling the cops," she said, all smug, like she thought she was doing me a favor. I was speechless. Who the hell calls the cops on their own family? I work with kids for a living. If anything about child abandonment ended up on my record, my career would be over. Sarah knew this, and she still pulled this shit. Still, I told her I'd leave as soon as I could, but I had to wrap up a few things at work first. My boss was understanding, but even with her support, I couldn't just drop everything immediately. By the time I got back to Sarah's place, it was just over an hour later. 2 squad cars were parked in front of Sarah's place, lights flashing, and my kids were standing on the porch looking scared out of their minds. I wanted to throw up. Sarah was standing there, talking to the officers like she was the damn victim in all this, acting all righteous and smug. I got out of my car, took a deep breath, and approached them. My first thought was to yell at Sarah right there in front of everyone, but I knew I couldn't. So I turned to the cops and tried to explain what had happened. There's been a misunderstanding. I told them I didn't abandon my kids. I dropped them off here this morning like I've done 100 times before, but I didn't see her message saying she couldn't watch them until I was already at work. One of the officers looked at me like he'd heard this story 1,000,000 times before. "You didn't see her messages?" he asked, skeptical. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I was driving and my phone was on silent. I called her back as soon as I saw the messages and told her I was on my way. I got here as fast as I could. Sarah, of course, had to chime in. "I told you I couldn't watch them today," she snapped. "You should have checked your phone before leaving them here. This is on you." I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept it together. "I didn't see the text." "Sarah, that's not an excuse to call the cops on me. You know I work with kids. Do you have any idea what this could have done to me?" She just shrugged like it was no big deal. The cops looked between us like they didn't want to be involved in our family drama. One of them finally said, "All right, this sounds like a communication issue. There's no crime here, so we're not filing any reports. Just make sure this doesn't happen again." They left, and I grabbed my kids and put them in the car. I didn't even look at Sarah as I walked back to my car, but she just had to get the last word in. "Maybe next time you'll check your phone." She yelled after me, "This was your fault, not mine." I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I'd said anything, it would have been a string of words that would have probably made me look like the crazy one. Instead, I slammed the car door, drove home, and spent the rest of the day trying to calm the calm down. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The cops, the smug look on Sarah's face, my kids looking terrified on that porch. The fact that I even had to explain myself to the police, it made my blood boil all over again. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly how much was at stake for me, and she did it anyway. A few days later, Sarah had the audacity to text me. She said, and I quote, "I think I might have overreacted. Can we go back to the old babysitting schedule?" I stared at the message for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide if I was going to respond or just block her outright. In the end, I decided she needed to hear exactly what I thought. "No, Sarah," I replied. "We're not going back to anything. You called the cops on me? On your own family? You knew what that could have done to me and you didn't give a damn. So no, I'm not babysitting your kids ever again." "Figure it out," she replied almost immediately, trying to twist it back on me. "If you'd checked your phone or spoken to me when you dropped them off, none of this would have happened," she wrote. "I warned you I would have handled it differently if I were in your position." I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. "You're out of your goddamn mind if you think this is my fault." I shot back, "You crossed a line and I'm done with you." She kept texting, trying to guilt me into forgiving her, but I didn't reply. I blocked her number and figured that would be the end of it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. A few days later, my brother Mike called me. Now Mike's usually a chill guy, but when it comes to Sarah, he's whipped as hell. He started off by saying he just wanted to talk, but it quickly turned into him yelling at me. "Why can't you just let this go?" he said. Sarah apologized. She knows she went too far. "We're family. You're really going to let one mistake ruin everything? One mistake? I snapped Mike. She called the goddamn cops on me. Do you understand? What could have happened if the cops hadn't believed me? My career would have been over. She knew that and didn't give a shit. She was pissed. He said like that made it okay. You're really going to hold a grudge over this? You're screwing us over, man. Sarah had to quit her job because we can't afford childcare now. Do you even care what this is doing to us? Not my problem, I told him. You guys made your bed. Now lie in it. Mike went off calling me selfish, saying I was tearing the family apart. I told him to go away and hung up on him. Then my mom called, and I knew I was in for another round of guilt tripping. Sure enough, she started with, "You're being unreasonable." Sarah apologized. Why can't you just forgive her? Because this isn't about an apology, Mom, I said. She didn't just screw me over. She put my entire career at risk. And now you're trying to make me feel bad because she's dealing with the consequences of her actions. I'm done. Of course she didn't get it. She said I was being childish and needed to think about how this was affecting the family. I told her I was thinking about the family, my own family, my kids, myself, not Sarah and Mike. And with that, I ended the call. Sarah calling the cops on me was bad enough, but the fallout from that decision was about to ripple through the entire family in ways none of us saw coming. I thought things couldn't get any worse. After Sarah called the cops on me and Mike blew up my phone with his guilt-tripping bullshit, but apparently I underestimated just how selfish and entitled these two could be. The real kicker came when my mom started paying the price, literally and figuratively, for their irresponsibility. After Sarah quit her job, she dumped her kids on my mom, who apparently decided it was her job to fix the mess. At first I didn't care. My mom had been defending Sarah, saying I was overreacting, so I figured she'd learned her lesson once Sarah pulled her usual crap on her. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. My mom started looking more and more exhausted every time I saw her. She complained about being tired, but wouldn't directly say she was overwhelmed. I knew she was trying to hold it together, but it was obvious that babysitting Sarah's kids 3 days a week was draining her. Then, one day, I got a call at work. It was my mom, and she sounded like shit. She was out of breath, saying she didn't feel well. My stomach sank immediately. I told her to stay put and rushed over to her place. When I got there, she looked pale and weak, sitting on the couch like she could barely hold herself up. I asked her what was wrong, and she said her chest felt tight and she had a headache that wouldn't go away. I wasn't about to take any chances, so I took her to the doctor. Turns out her blood pressure was sky high, dangerously high. The doctor said she needed to rest and avoid stress. Of course, I knew exactly what was causing her stress: Sarah and her kids. But even after hearing this, my mom refused to blame Sarah outright. "They're my grandkids," she said when I brought it up. "I can't just stop helping, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Helping is one thing. Letting them walk all over you is another. You're not responsible for their kids. That's Sarah and Mike's job. She sighed, but didn't say anything. I could tell she wasn't ready to stand up to them yet, but I sure as hell was. The next time Sarah came by to drop off her kids, I happened to be at my mom's place. I wasn't planning on being there, but I swung by to check on her, and Sarah showed up. All smiles, acting like she wasn't dumping her problems on a sick woman. "Hi, Mom," she chirped, ushering her kids inside. "I'll be back around 6. I stepped in before my mom could say anything. "Actually, no you won't," I said, crossing my arms. Sarah froze and looked at me like I just slapped her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone immediately defensive. "I mean, you're not leaving your kids here anymore?" I said. "Mom just got out of the goddamn doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and the last thing she needs is to babysit your kids while you sit on your ass all day." Sarah's face turned red. "I'm not sitting on my ass," she snapped. "I'm handling things at home while Mike works. Do you know how hard it is to manage everything?" "Yeah, I do," I shot back. "And guess what? It's your responsibility. Not Mom's, not mine, yours. figure it the go away. My mom tried to intervene, of course, Ashley. That's enough. We can talk about this later. No, Mom, we can't, I said, turning to her. You've been bending over backward for them, and look where it's gotten you, at the doctor's office. It's time to stop. Sarah, meanwhile, was fuming. You don't get to decide that, she hissed. This is between me and Mom. Like hell it is, I said. You're putting her health at risk because you and Mike can't get your shit together. I'm not letting this continue. She stormed out with her kids, muttering under her breath about how I was ruining everything. I didn't care if she thought she could guilt me into backing down. She was dead wrong. For a while, I thought maybe that confrontation would be the wake-up call Sarah needed, but nope. The very next week, she dropped her kids off at my mom's house again, as if nothing had happened. My mom called me later that day, apologizing for not standing up to Sarah. I just don't know how to say no to her, she admitted. She always makes me feel guilty. Mom, I said, trying not to lose my temper, you have to stop letting her manipulate you. She's not going to stop until you put your foot down. I know, she said quietly. But what about the kids? They didn't ask for any of this, and they're not your responsibility, I reminded her. You can love them without letting their mom walk all over you. The breaking point came a week later when my mom ended up back in the hospital. Her blood pressure had spiked again, and this time the doctor warned her that she needed to make serious changes or risk of stroke. Seeing her like that, hooked up to monitors looking so fragile, broke something in me. When Mike showed up to pick up Sarah's kids, I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted him right there in the hospital. You and Sarah are dispatch mom, I told him bluntly. If you leave your kids with her again, I swear to God I'll call the cops myself. Don't be ridiculous, he said, rolling his eyes. She loves watching them. She wants to help. Bullshit, I snapped. She's too nice to say no, and you're taking advantage of that. You're putting her health at risk because you and Sarah can't figure out how to parent your own damn kids. Mike didn't like that one bit. He started yelling about how I was being dramatic and making things harder for everyone. I told him I didn't give a curse if they couldn't handle their shit. That was on them, not me, and definitely not my mom. Later that night, I sat down with my mom and told her she had to stop babysitting. I love you, Mom, but this has to end, I said. You've done more than enough. It's time to put yourself first, she cried. Of course, she hated feeling like she was letting anyone down, even people who didn't deserve her kindness. But I think the second hospital visit finally drove the point home. She agreed to tell Sarah and Mike that she couldn't babysit anymore. Even though I knew it was going to be a battle, Sarah and Mike weren't going to like it, but I didn't care. They needed to start taking responsibility for their own damn lives, whether they liked it or not. You'd think Sarah and Mike would get the hint after my mom's trip to the hospital, but nope. These two just kept doubling down on their entitlement. When my mom finally told them she couldn't babysit anymore, they acted like she'd just betrayed them. Sarah had a meltdown, crying about how hard it was for her to manage everything and saying, "My mom promised to help." Mike, as usual, took the passive-aggressive route. He called me up furious, trying to pin the whole thing on me like it was my fault for turning Mom against them. "You happy now?" he snarled. "Mom won't help anymore because you had to get involved." "Yeah, I am happy," I snapped back. "Because now she won't end up in the hospital again, thanks to you and your wife's bullshit. She wants to help," he shouted. "You're making it harder for everyone." "No, Mike, you're making it harder for everyone." I said, "You and Sarah are lazy as hell and think everyone else should pick up the slack. Mom almost had a goddamn stroke because of you two, and you're still acting like the victims grow up." He hung up on me after that, but I didn't care. I was done trying to reason with him. If he and Sarah wanted to keep digging their own graves, that was their problem. I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded nervous, which immediately put me on edge. "Ashley." Sarah dropped the kids off again. She said, her voice shaking. I saw red. What the hell? Mom, you told her you couldn't do it anymore? I did, she said quietly, but she just left them here and said she'd be back later. That was it. I'd had enough. I called Sarah, and when she didn't pick up, typical, I left her a voicemail. You've got 45 minutes to pick up your kids or I'm calling the goddamn cops, and unlike you, I'm not bluffing. Get your shit together. I was shaking with rage when I hung up, but honestly, it felt good to give her a taste of her own medicine. Sarah showed up about 30 minutes later, just like I knew she would. She came storming into my mom's house yelling about how unreasonable I was being. "You're taking this way too far," she screamed. "You wouldn't actually call the cops on me. Try me," I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "You were more than happy to do it to me, so why the hell shouldn't I?" She kept ranting about how I was blowing things out of proportion, but I didn't engage. I just stared at her until she grabbed her kids and left. My mom looked horrified, but I didn't feel the slightest bit guilty. Someone had to stand up to Sarah, and if my mom couldn't do it, I would. Of course. Mike called me later that night to check me out. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled. "You're really threatening to call the cops on us now? You're taking this way too far." "Oh, so now it's a problem when someone threatens to call the cops," I shot back. "Maybe you should have thought about that when Sarah pulled the same shit on me." "She was upset," Mike protested. "She didn't mean it like that." "Well, now I'm upset and I do mean it," I said. "You two are a goddamn train wreck, and I'm not going to let you drag Mom or me down with you. Figure your shit out. You're tearing this family apart," he shouted. "No, Mike, you and Sarah are doing that all on your own," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The next week, Sarah tried her usual routine, dropping the kids off at my mom's house without asking. But this time I wasn't going to let it slide. I'd already warned her, so I didn't bother calling. I went straight to the police non-emergency line and reported an abandonment issue. I told them there were 2 kids left with a sick, elderly woman who couldn't care for them. When the officers showed up, Sarah was absolutely livid. She stormed into my mom's house while they were still there, screaming about how I was ruining her life. "This is your fault," she yelled at me. "You're destroying my family." "No, Sarah, you're destroying your own family," I said calmly. "You've been dumping your responsibilities on everyone else, and now it's catching up to you." The officers made her take her kids and warned her not to leave them with someone who couldn't care for them. The look on her face was priceless. She wanted to argue, but even she wasn't stupid enough to push it further. After that, Sarah and Mike stopped trying to involve my mom, but the fallout from their mess was just beginning. Sarah was struggling to handle the kids on her own, and Mike was working overtime to make up for her lost income. Their marriage was clearly strained. Mike even started crashing at my mom's house a few nights a week, which only made things more awkward for everyone. My mom was upset, of course. She hated seeing the family fall apart, but I reminded her that this was all Sarah and Mike's doing. They're reaping what they sowed. I told her this isn't your fault and it's not your job to fix it. She nodded, but I could tell she still felt torn. That's the thing about my mom. She's too kind for her own good. But even she was starting to see that Sarah and Mike were beyond help. After the police visit, Sarah and Mike finally seemed to get the message. They stopped dumping their kids at my mom's house, but the fallout was already in full swing. Sarah was stuck at home trying to manage her kids 24/7, and let's just say she wasn't handling it well. Mike was working non-stop to cover their bills, and the cracks in their marriage were getting bigger by the day. I wasn't surprised when my mom told me Mike had started crashing at her place some nights. Apparently, he needed space from Sarah because the constant fighting was driving him nuts. My mom tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was worried. She kept saying things like, "I just want everyone to get along and family shouldn't be this way." I love my mom, but I couldn't help rolling my eyes. "Mom, this isn't about getting along." Sarah and Mike made their bed, and now they're lying in it. "This is on them, not us." "But Ashley," she said, her voice cracking, What if they can't make it work? What if this breaks their family? I sighed. If their family is falling apart, that's because they refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. You can't keep fixing everything for them. Meanwhile, Sarah started spreading her version of the story to anyone who would listen, according to her. I was the villain who refused to help my own family in their time of need. She left out the part where she called the cops on me. Of course. Instead, she painted herself as a struggling mom, just trying to do her best while I selfishly turned my back on them. I started getting calls from extended family members, all parroting Sarah's bullshit. "Why can't you just help them out?" one aunt asked. "It's not like you're doing anything wrong, but you're making their lives so much harder." "Oh, I'm making their lives harder," I snapped. "Did Sarah tell you she called the goddamn cops on me? Because that's why we're here." The silence on the other end of the line was always golden. I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative and make me out to be the bad guy. The drama hit its peak about a month later, when Mike showed up at my mom's house in the middle of the night. He was drunk off his ass and rambling about how he couldn't take it anymore. And yes, before you ask, I'd warned my mom not to let him stay there, but she's too soft-hearted to turn him away. When I found out the next morning, I called him, ready to let him have it. "What the hell is wrong with you, Mike? Showing up at Mom's house like that? She doesn't need this shit." "You don't understand," he slurred, clearly still hungover. "Sarah's driving me crazy. She's always bitching about how hard things are, and I'm the one working my ass off to keep us afloat. Well, maybe if you two had your shit together, you wouldn't be in this mess," I snapped. "But hey, keep blaming everyone else. That's been working great for you so far." He started yelling, but I hung up before he could finish. I wasn't wasting any more energy on him. The final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later when Sarah officially quit her job for good. She'd been trying to hold on to a part-time gig, but between the cost of childcare and her inability to manage her kids without help, she gave up. Mike, meanwhile, picked up even more hours at work, but it still wasn't enough. Their bills were piling up, and their savings, if they even had any, were gone. I found out from my mom that they were considering moving back in with Sarah's parents several hours away. "They don't have many options left," she said, sounding genuinely sad. "Good," I said bluntly. "Maybe they'll figure out how to handle their shit without dragging everyone else down with them." She didn't respond, but I could tell she was still holding on to some hope that things would turn around. I didn't share her optimism. People like Sarah and Mike don't change unless they're forced to, and even then, it's a long shot. A few weeks after that, I got a call from Mike. It was short and to the point. "We're moving," he said. "Thanks for nothing, asshole." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're welcome," I said and hung up. As of now, Sarah and Mike are out of the picture. They moved back in with Sarah's parents. And from what I've heard, their relationship is hanging by a thread. I'd be lying if I said I felt bad for them. They brought this on themselves, and I'm not about to lose sleep over it. My mom is doing better now that she's not babysitting or dealing with their drama. She still talks about how sad it is that the family fell apart, but I remind her that it's not our job to fix people who don't want to be fixed. As for me, I've made my peace with the situation. I don't think my relationship with Mike and Sarah will ever recover, but honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people need to hit rock bottom before they learn anything, and even then they might not change. At the end of the day, I have my own family to take care of, and that's where my focus is. If Sarah and Mike want to keep playing the victim, they can do it without me. I'm done. Story 3. This story is titled, "Daughter Testified I Was Unfit as a Parent Giving My Ex Full Custody." Now she's back. After she kicked her out, my ex-wife, 45, female, and I, 46 male, divorced 3 years ago and have 3 kids together. 24 male, 22 female, and 17 female. Since our 2 older kids were already moved out and in college when we divorced, the only custody and child support this year we had was our youngest daughter, Mary, who was 14 when we split. My ex wanted full custody while I was pushing for shared custody. I had moved into an apartment at this time, and Mary would stay with her mom during the week because it was easier for school. She would come stay with me on weekends, though I answered any questions Mary had about our divorce. But I made it a point to never say anything negative. I didn't want Mary to think that anything she had done was the cause for our divorce. I cherished the weekends we spent together, and from everything I saw, Mary enjoyed our time together too. Then the court hearing came, and when I walked into the courthouse that day, I honestly thought things were going to go fine. I wasn't expecting it to be easy, but I'd convinced myself that Mary wouldn't make things any harder than they already were. I mean, I'd done my best to stay a good dad, even with everything falling apart between Sarah and me. I showed up for every weekend, kept things civil, and never spoke badly about her mom. I thought that counted for something, but as soon as Mary got up to speak, I could feel the room shift. She stood there, clutching her little statement, looking way more confident than a 14-year-old should in that situation, and then she started reading. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The tone in her voice was sharp, like she was trying to make me hurt. She said I was unfit to be a parent, that I didn't care about her, and that I'd only been trying to get custody to hurt her mom. She even said I was selfish and didn't prioritize her needs. I sat there stunned while my lawyer shot me a look that basically screamed, "What the hell is happening?" Hearing my own daughter say those things, it felt like a punch right in the gut. I couldn't understand where it was coming from, the way she talked. You'd think I was some deadbeat who never showed up or cared. But I was there. I was always there. Even when it felt like Sarah was trying to edge me out of Mary's life. The words kept coming, though. She talked about how she felt unsafe around me, how she wanted nothing to do with my apartment, and how her mom's house was the only place she felt comfortable. She even threw in some weird, exaggerated stuff about my apartment being too small and depressing. I couldn't believe it. I'd worked hard to make that place feel like home for her, and here she was, tearing it apart like it was a joke. The whole time. Sarah sat there with a smug little smile. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. Mary was doing all the damage for her. I wanted to speak up so badly. I wanted to interrupt and tell Mary she was wrong, to remind her of all the times we'd had fun together, all the weekends I'd spent trying to make her feel normal, despite everything going on. But I couldn't. I just had to sit there and take it. By the time Mary finished, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but from the sheer pain of it all. How could my own daughter, my baby girl, say those things about me? Did she even believe them? Or was this just Sarah's influence? I didn't know what hurt more, the possibility that she truly hated me, or the thought that Sarah had convinced her too. When the hearing ended, I tried to talk to her. I wasn't going to yell or argue, I just wanted to understand. I followed her out into the hallway, called her name, and said, "Mary, can we please talk for a minute?" She didn't even stop. She just glanced over her shoulder and said, "There's nothing to talk about," before walking off with Sarah. And Sarah, of course, turned around and gave me this cold, satisfied look before telling me to leave them alone. I can't even describe how empty I felt in that moment. It wasn't just that Mary didn't want to talk. It was the realization that she might never want to again. I drove home that night in silence, replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. Every word she said felt like a stab. Unfit, selfish, unsafe. None of it made sense, but there was no way to defend myself without making things worse. I spent the next few days wondering where I went wrong. Did I not do enough during the marriage? Was it my fault for moving out and leaving Sarah to handle the weekdays? Or was this just Sarah poisoning Mary against me? It didn't matter which option it was. They all sucked. From that day on, everything changed. I knew I'd lost something important, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. But the worst part wasn't even the loss. It was the fact that Mary didn't seem to care at all. After the custody hearing, things were different. I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't like Mary and I had some huge blowout argument or an official we're done moment, but after that day, she stopped answering my texts. She wouldn't pick up when I called, and when I tried to check in through Sarah, all I'd get was vague responses or, more often, silence. The weekends I used to look forward to so much, they were just gone. No explanation. No, I don't want to come over. Nothing. I'd sit in my apartment on Friday nights waiting for her to show up, hoping maybe she changed her mind, but she never did. At first, I told myself she was probably just angry or upset and needed some time. But as the weeks turned into months, it was clear she was done with me. I didn't want to push her, you know. I thought if I gave her space, she'd come around eventually. So I kept texting her. Just little things. I hope you're doing well. Good luck on your test this week. I miss you, kiddo. Stuff like that. I didn't get a single response, not even a thanks. Every now and then, I'd hear from Josh or Emma. They'd give me bits and pieces about Mary, how school was going, that she'd made the cheerleading team, stuff like that. It wasn't much, but at least it was something they didn't seem to know much more than I did about why she'd cut me off, though. When I asked if Mary had said anything to them about me, they both said no. She just didn't talk about me at all. One day, Emma called me. She said Mary had mentioned something about feeling abandoned during the divorce. That caught me completely off guard. I mean, I fought tooth and nail for shared custody. How could she think I abandoned her when I was the one trying to keep us connected? I tried reaching out again after that. I sent her a longer text saying how much I missed her and that I was sorry if she ever felt like I wasn't there for her. I told her I'd always be there if she wanted to talk, no matter what. And you know what I got? Nothing. It was like I didn't exist. At some point, Sarah stopped even pretending to keep me in the loop. Anytime I tried to ask about Mary, her grades, how she was doing emotionally, anything, Sarah would just shut me down. "She's fine," she'd say, like that was supposed to be enough. It got to the point where the only connection I had to Mary was the child support payments I sent every month and the college fund I kept contributing to. I didn't stop, though. Even if she hated me, I wasn't going to give up on my responsibility as her dad. It wasn't all bad, though. Around this time, I started dating Lisa. She was a single mom with 3 kids of her own, and honestly, she was the first real bright spot in my life since the divorce. Lisa understood what I was going through. Her ex had made things messy for her, too. Her kids were great, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some stability. But even with Lisa in my life, there was always this Mary-shaped hole I couldn't fill. Every time I saw her picture on social media or heard about her from Josh or Emma, it was like a reminder of how badly I'd failed. I kept thinking, what could I have done differently? How do I fix this? The thing is, I couldn't fix it. Not on my own, anyway. Mary had made her choice. She didn't want me in her life, and I didn't know how to change that without making things worse. So I drifted. I focused on Lisa, her kids, my job. I told myself that if Mary wanted to reconnect, I'd be ready. Until then, I just had to accept that this was my reality. A father without his daughter waiting for a relationship that might never come back. It had been 3 years since the custody hearing, and at this point, I had accepted that my relationship with Mary was practically not existent. I wasn't happy about it, but what could I do? She didn't want me in her life, and I wasn't going to force my way in. Life was finally starting to feel normal again. I was settled in with Lisa, and her kids were great. They weren't replacements for my own kids, but being around them made things feel a little less empty. Lisa and I had a good thing going, and I was happy for the first time in a long while. Then, one night, completely out of nowhere, I got a call from Mary. I stared at my phone for a second, almost not believing it. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. I mean, what could she possibly want now? But of course I picked up Dad, she said, and immediately I could tell she'd been crying. Her voice cracked, like she was trying to hold it together, but it wasn't working. "What's wrong?" I asked, already feeling that knot in my stomach. She started talking fast, like she didn't know how much time she had to explain. "Mom kicked me out. I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't know who else to call." Then hearing her say that after everything tore me up inside for so long, I had been the last person she wanted to talk to, and now, when she had nowhere else to turn, I was the one she called. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or heartbroken. "Of course you can." "Come here," I told her. "We'll figure it out, okay?" Lisa was sitting on the couch next to me, and she gave me this look, half confused, half concerned. I mouthed, "It's Mary," and she nodded, not saying a word. When Mary showed up at the house, she looked different. Not just older, but tired, like she'd been carrying some heavy stuff for a while. She hugged me when she came in, which caught me off guard. I mean, this was the same girl who hadn't even wanted to text me back, and now she was hugging me like her life depended on it. I didn't push her for details right away. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready, and sure enough. Later that night, she opened up a little. Mom and I got into a fight. She said, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, Lisa had made her. She said she can't deal with me anymore. I tried to keep my face neutral, but inside I was furious. I couldn't believe Sarah would just throw her out like that. "What happened?" I asked gently. Mary hesitated, looking down at the table. "I threw a party while she was out of town. Things got out of hand, some stuff got broken. It wasn't the whole story I could tell, but I didn't press." "What about the other stuff she said?" I asked carefully. Mary sighed, her shoulders slumping. "She thinks I have a drug problem, but I don't. I've smoked weed a few times, but it's not like I'm doing anything serious." I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure this was a side of Mary. I didn't really know, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. After she went to bed, Lisa and I stayed up talking. "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked. "I don't know." I admitted she can stay here for now, but long-term, I'm not sure. Lisa looked worried. "I want to help, but we have to think about the kids. They don't know her. And if what her mom's saying is true," she didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. It wasn't just about me and Mary anymore. I had a whole new family to consider, and I couldn't just make a decision without thinking of them. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, Mary was back in my life, and all I could think about was how completely unprepared I felt. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what that was supposed to look like. All I knew was that the next few days were going to be some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The next morning, after Mary had slept in a bit, I decided to get more clarity on what had happened. It wasn't like I wanted to grill her or anything, but if I was going to figure out how to help her, I needed to know the full story. "Hey, Mary," I said as she sat down at the kitchen table for breakfast. Lisa had already taken her kids to school, so it was just the two of us. "I don't want to push, but can you tell me more about what happened with your mom?" She avoided my eyes, stirring her cereal for way too long before answering. "I told you, Dad, I threw a party. Some stuff got broken and Mom freaked out." "Okay," I said carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. "But your mom doesn't just kick you out over a party. There's got to be more to it." Mary sighed loudly and pushed her bowl away. "She's been on my case for months about stupid stuff. My grades, my friends, everything. The party was just the last straw. I guess I could tell she wasn't giving me the full picture, but I didn't want to push too hard and make her shut down completely. Instead, I decided to call Sarah and get her side of the story. The call wasn't exactly pleasant. As soon as Sarah picked up, she launched into her usual condescending tone. "Oh, so now you want to get involved? Where were you when she was spiraling?" "Spiraling," I repeated. "What are you talking about?" Sarah went on to tell me that Mary had been caught skipping school, failing classes, and according to her, hanging out with a bad crowd. She claimed the party wasn't just some minor thing. It had been a full-blown disaster. The house was trashed and several expensive items were either broken or stolen. And don't even get me started on the drugs, Sarah added. I found weed in her room weeks ago, and I'm pretty sure she's using more than that. Hearing all this made my stomach turn. Was Mary really that far gone, or was Sarah exaggerating? I knew she wasn't exactly known for handling things calmly when I got off the phone. I went back to Mary, who was scrolling through her phone on the couch. "I talked to your mom," I said, sitting down across from her. Her eyes narrowed. "Of course you did." "Mary," she said, "you've been skipping school and failing your classes. Is that true?" She shrugged, not meeting my gaze. "School's been hard, okay? I've had a lot going on." "And the weed?" I asked. That got a reaction. She sat up straighter, her face defensive. "It's not a big deal, Dad. It's just weed. Everyone smokes it." I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not here to judge, Mary. I just need to understand what's going on so I can help you." She crossed her arms and glared at me. "Help me? Like you've been helping me the past 3 years?" "Yeah, okay, that stung," but I let it slide. "Look, your mom thinks you have a drug problem. Is there anything else I need to know?" Mary rolled her eyes. "She's exaggerating, like always. I threw a party. It got out of hand, and now she's acting like I'm some kind of criminal." I didn't know what to believe. On one hand, Sarah wasn't the most reliable narrator. But on the other, Mary's defensiveness didn't exactly scream innocence. That evening, Lisa and I had a long talk after the kids went to bed. She says it's just weed. I told her, but Sarah's convinced it's more. Lisa looked worried. "And you believe her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Mary's not exactly giving me much to work with." Lisa sighed. "Look, I feel for her, but we have to think about the kids. If what Sarah's saying is true, having her here might not be the best idea." I nodded. Even though it made me feel sick to my stomach, the idea of turning Mary away after she'd finally come to me for help felt wrong. But Lisa had a point. Her kids didn't know Mary at all, and the last thing I wanted was to bring chaos into their lives. The truth was, I felt completely stuck. Mary needed help, real help, but I didn't know if I could give it to her. And with Lisa's concerns hanging over me, I started to wonder if I was in way over my head. The next day, I knew it was time to make a call. Mary was still at the house, acting like nothing was wrong. She was on her phone most of the time, barely speaking to me or Lisa unless she needed something. The tension in the house was thick. Lisa was trying to keep things normal for her kids, but I could tell she was worried. After the kids went to bed, Lisa and I sat down in the kitchen. "We need to decide what we're doing here," Lisa said, her voice low but firm. "I want to help her, I really do, but she can't just stay here indefinitely." I nodded, staring at the table. I'd been running scenarios in my head all day, and none of them felt right. "I know," I said, "but I don't know where else she's supposed to go. She's my daughter, Lisa. How do I just tell her?" "No." Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "I get it, I really do. But you have to think about what this means for the rest of us. She's 17, and she's obviously going through something serious. I'm worried about what kind of influence she could have on the kids. She wasn't wrong. As much as it hurt to admit, Lisa's kids were my responsibility. To now, they didn't ask for any of this, and I couldn't risk them being dragged into Mary's problems. I'll talk to her," I said finally. "But it's not going to be easy." That night, I knocked on Mary's door. She was lying on the bed, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I came in. "What?" she asked, her tone cold and dismissive. "Mary, we need to talk," I said, sitting down on the chair by the desk. She rolled her eyes and sat up, crossing her arms. "Let me guess. Mom called you again and now you're gonna lecture me?" "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't about your mom, it's about what happens next." Her face immediately hardened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a deep breath, already feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Mary, you can't stay here long term. This house isn't set up for that, and with everything going on, I just don't think it's the right environment for you." Her mouth dropped open, and for a second she just stared at me. Then the anger hit. "Are you serious?" she snapped. "You said you'd help me. You're my dad. And you're just going to throw me out again? I'm not throwing you out," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I want to help you, but I don't think this is the best place for you right now. We can look into other options, maybe counseling or a program that can give you the support you need." "Oh my God," she cut me off, standing up. "You really don't get it, do you? I don't need some stupid program. I just need a place to stay. And you can't even do that for me." "Mary," I said, standing up too, "it's not that simple. There are other people in this house to consider." "Of course," she interrupted, throwing her hands in the air. "Your new perfect family. Guess I don't fit into that." Her words stung, but I couldn't let her guilt me into making a decision I wasn't sure was right. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "I've been trying to reach out to you for years, and you shut me out every time. Now you show up out of nowhere and I'm supposed to just drop everything?" She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "You don't get it. You never got it. I called you because I didn't have anyone else, and now I see why." With that, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, she packed her things and left without saying a word. I tried to talk to her before she left, but she just brushed me off as the door closed behind her. I felt a crushing sense of failure. I tried to do what was best for her, for Lisa, for everyone, but it didn't feel like enough. Watching her leave was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but I didn't see any other way. Now I'm left wondering if I made the right choice. Did I protect my family, or did I just fail my daughter when she needed me the most? After Mary left, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. Even Lisa, who had been the most concerned about having her stay, seemed a little off. She tried to reassure me that I'd done the right thing, but it didn't feel that way. How could it? My daughter, who had come to me for help, had walked out the door, and I let her the first few days after she left. I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. I kept hearing her voice. "You don't get it. You never got it." Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't tried hard enough to understand what she was going through. I reached out to Sarah, hoping she might give me a refresh on where Mary had gone, but my calls went unanswered. No texts back, no voicemails. Josh and Emma were just as in the dark as I was. Josh said Mary wasn't responding to him either, and Emma told me she'll talk when she's ready. "Dad, you just have to wait. Wait." That's all I'd been doing for years, waiting for Mary to come around, waiting for her to open up, waiting for her to let me be her dad again. And now, when she'd finally turned to me, I'd sent her away. I couldn't shake the guilt. I threw myself into work and into spending time with Lisa and her kids, trying to distract myself, but no matter what I did, Mary was always on my mind. At night, when the house was quiet, I'd sit in the living room and wonder where she was, what she was doing, and if she was okay. I kept thinking about the last few years, how our relationship had fallen apart, and all the missed chances to fix it. Maybe if I'd pushed harder back, then this wouldn't have happened. Maybe if I'd fought more for shared custody, or refused to let Sarah have so much control, Mary wouldn't have drifted so far away. But maybe it doesn't change anything. It's just noise. A couple of weeks later, I got a text from Josh. "Hey Dad, heard from Mary. She's back at Mom's. Doesn't want to talk about what happened." It was a relief to know where she was, but it didn't make me feel much better. She was back in the same situation that had driven her to call me in the first place. What if it just happened again? I tried texting her, just something simple. "Hey, Mary, I'm glad you're safe. Please let me know if you need anything. I'm always here." No response. Lisa did her best to comfort me, but even she struggled to find the right words. One night after the kids were in bed, she said, "You can't beat yourself up forever, you know? You tried to help her, but you also had to think about what was best for everyone." "I know," I said, staring at the floor. But she's still my kid. I should have done more. Lisa sat down next to me. You can't pour from an empty cup. You've been doing everything you can, and at some point Mary has to meet you halfway. It sounded reasonable, but it didn't feel that way. As a parent, you're supposed to show up no matter what. But when she finally needed me most, I'd sent her back to the same place that had hurt her. Months went by, and things started to settle back into a routine. I kept texting Mary every now and then, even though I never got a reply. Josh and Emma visited more often, but whenever I asked about Mary, they'd change the subject or shrug like they didn't know what to say. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I could have done differently. Should I have fought harder to keep her at my house? Should I have ignored Lisa's concerns and focused solely on Mary? Or would that have caused even more damage in the long run? The truth is, I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. All I can do now is keep trying, keep reaching out, keep showing up, and hope that one day Mary will let me back into her life. Until then, I'm stuck in this limbo, regretting the past, unsure about the future, and wishing I'd done better when I... Story 4. This story is titled, Stepsister Stole from My Dad. Stepmom framed me, and I got disowned, but karma hit them hard. I was 17 when my life completely fell apart. To be honest, things hadn't been great for a while. My dad and I weren't exactly close. And his marriage to Carol, my stepmom, only made things worse. But what happened that day? I still replay it in my head, wondering if there was ever anything I could have done differently. Let me back up a little. My stepsister, Ashley, was the golden child. She was 20 at the time, 3 years older than me, and had this way of getting everything she wanted. She was one of those people who could do no wrong in the eyes of adults, especially my dad. Meanwhile, I felt like I couldn't breathe without someone accusing me of doing it wrong. I learned early on to keep my head down and stay out of the way. But even that wasn't enough. Ashley hated me. I don't use that word lightly, but it's the truth. She had this venomous energy around me that I could never understand. I tried being nice when I first moved in with them, but it didn't take long to realize it didn't matter what I did. She just didn't want me there. And Carol. She only made it worse. If Ashley said the sky was green, Carol would be out there arguing with NASA to back her up. It was little things at first. Ashley would borrow my stuff without asking. Makeup, clothes, even my phone charger, and then play dumb when I confronted her. If I complained to my dad, Carol would swoop in, twisting the story to make me sound unreasonable or selfish. She's just borrowing it. She'd say, "Why are you always so dramatic?" The worst part was that my dad believed them every single time. I think part of him was just relieved not to have to deal with the fallout of his divorce from my mom. He'd latch on to whatever story Carol fed him because it was easier than dealing with me. If you asked him, I was the problem child, just like my mom. He liked to throw that one around a lot. "You're just like her," he'd say whenever I dared to speak up. He never said it like it was a compliment. So by the time the watch incident happened, things had already been building for years. My dad had this watch, this ridiculously expensive, custom-made thing that my mom had given him back when they were married. It wasn't just a watch to him. It was sentimental. One of the few things he kept from their marriage, though he'd never admit it, outright. He wore it on special occasions and polished it like it was some kind of family heirloom. I didn't even realize the watch was missing until I came home from school one day and walked straight into a storm. My dad was pacing in the living room, his face bright red. Carol was sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, glaring at me like I just committed some terrible crime. And Ashley, she was sitting off to the side, looking way too innocent. It was the kind of innocent that practically screams guilt. But my dad never saw it that way. "Where is it?" My dad barked the moment I stepped inside. I froze, confused. "Where's what?" "The watch," Carol snapped, like I was being difficult on purpose. "Don't play dumb, young lady." "Ashley saw you sneaking around in your dad's room." "What?" "I wasn't?" My brain scrambled to catch up. I'd barely been home that week except to sleep. The only time I'd even gone near their room was to grab the cat when she bolted upstairs. "I didn't take anything." Ashley nodded, her expression all fake concern. "I saw you coming out of Dad's room the other day. You looked sketchy." "Sketchy? Really?" That's what she was going with. "I didn't take your stupid watch," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could already feel the panic setting in. I didn't even know it was gone. Carol shook her head, her lips curling into that smug little smirk she always wore when she thought she'd won. "You've been acting strange lately. Ever since the cat died, maybe you were looking for attention. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. My cat, my childhood pet, had passed away the week before, and I was still grieving. She'd been with me since I was 3 years old, the one constant in my life when everything else fell apart. And now Carol was using that against me." I couldn't believe it. "I'm not looking for attention," I shot back, my voice shaking. But my dad cut me off before I could even finish. "Enough!" he shouted. "I've had it with your nonsense. First the attitude, and now this. You're just like your mother, a liar and a lunatic." My heart dropped. I could feel my throat tightening, tears threatening to spill over. I didn't take it. I whispered, "I swear." But he wasn't listening. He never listened. Carol was already packing up my things, throwing them into a bag like she couldn't get me out of the house fast enough. My dad stood there, arms crossed, watching it all happen. Ashley stayed on the couch, not saying a word, but the smirk on her face said it all. She'd won. "Get out," my dad said, his voice cold and final. "Go to your mother's if she'll have you, but you're not staying here." I begged him to reconsider, to at least hear me out, but it was no use. He'd made up his mind to him. I was guilty, and that was the end of it. By the time Carol shoved the duffel bag into my arms and slammed the door behind me, I was too numb to even cry. I walked to the bus stop in a daze, replaying the whole thing over and over in my head. How could my dad, my own father, throw me out like that over a watch? I didn't know where else to go except my mom's house. She wasn't exactly stable. She had her own issues. But at least I knew she wouldn't accuse me of being a thief. My mom was surprised to see me, but not in the warm. "Oh, honey, what happened?" Way you'd expect. She wasn't the comforting type. Her reaction was more like, "Well, what did you do this time? I didn't do anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad thinks I stole his watch and he kicked me out." She gave me this look, the kind that says I don't believe you, but I'm too tired to argue. "You can stay here, but don't expect me to fix your problems," she said. "I've got enough on my plate that pretty much set the tone for my life for the next few years." My mom's place wasn't much of a home. She lived in a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of cigarettes and mildew, with peeling wallpaper and creaky floors that groaned under the weight of your footsteps. It was always a mess. Papers piled on every surface, half-empty coffee cups forgotten on the counter, and a sink that seemed permanently full of dishes, but it was better than being on the streets. I spent that first night on her old lumpy couch, staring at the ceiling. The events of the day played on a loop in my head. Ashley's smug face, Carol packing my bag, my dad's cold eyes as he told me to leave. I kept thinking, how could he believe them over me? But no matter how many times I asked myself that, the answer was always the same. He never really wanted me there to begin with. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mom arguing with someone over the phone. I didn't have to guess who it was. She had plenty of people in her life to argue with: old friends, old flames, landlords, the electric company. When she wasn't fighting with someone, she was either chain-smoking on the balcony or binge-watching whatever trashy reality show was on. She wasn't a bad person, but she wasn't exactly stable either. I tried to make myself useful around the apartment, partly to earn my keep, and partly to distract myself. I cleaned up, did the dishes, and helped sort through the mountain of unopened mail on the kitchen table. My mom didn't say much, but she didn't stop me either. It was her way of saying thanks, I guess. School was my only escape. I was in my senior year of high school, and while most of my classmates were worrying about prom and college applications, I was just trying to survive. I got up early every morning to take the bus, spent my days keeping my head down in class, and worked part-time at a fast food joint after school to save up some money. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The hardest part was pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to tell anyone what had happened, not my teachers, not my coworkers, not even my friends. I wasn't close to a lot of people, and the few friends I did have didn't really know what my home life was like. They thought my dad was strict, sure, but they didn't know about the constant tension, the feeling that I was walking on eggshells every second I was in that house. I tried reaching out to my dad a few times in those first few weeks. I left him voicemails, sent him texts, even wrote an email explaining everything. I told him I didn't take the watch, that I would never do something like that. I begged him to at least hear me out, but he never responded. Not once. That hurt more than anything else. Not just that he didn't believe me, but that he didn't care enough to even ask for my side of the story. He'd made up his mind, and I was just gone. Meanwhile, Ashley and Carol. They were living their best lives. I saw pictures on social media. Ashley at some fancy brunch. Carol showing off a new handbag. And it made me sick. They didn't just win. They got to keep living comfortably while I was struggling to scrape by. It wasn't fair, but what could I do? They had my dad wrapped around their fingers, and I had nothing. My mom, for all her faults, didn't make me feel like a burden. Not exactly, but she wasn't exactly a warm presence either. She had her own issues to deal with, and I was just another body in her already cramped apartment. She let me stay as long as I kept out of trouble, but it was clear I couldn't rely on her for much beyond that. Still, I kept going. I graduated high school, which felt like a miracle in itself. My mom didn't come to the ceremony, but I didn't expect her to. It was just me sitting in the back row with the other kids who didn't have a cheering section. I didn't even have anyone to take a picture with, but I was proud of myself for making it that far. After graduation, I worked full-time at the fast food place while saving up for college. My mom didn't have the money to help, and my dad, forget it. He didn't even acknowledge my existence anymore, but I managed to scrape together enough for community college, and eventually I transferred to a university. It wasn't easy. Nothing in my life ever was, but I made it work. Over time, the pain started to dull. I stopped checking my phone for messages from my dad. I stopped thinking about Ashley and Carol, about the life they stole from me. I focused on myself, on building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For years past like that, I graduated from college with a degree I was actually proud of, and got my first real job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of independence I'd never had before. My mom was proud in her own way, even if she didn't always know how to show it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to move on. Then, out of the blue, I got an invitation to my grandpa's 75th birthday party. I wasn't sure what to think at first. After everything that had happened with my dad, I hadn't expected to hear from anyone on that side of the family. But Grandpa had always been different. He wasn't like my dad or Carol. He'd helped me out a couple of times when I was really struggling sending money without asking questions. He wasn't rich, but he cared in a way that felt real. So when I saw his name on the invitation, I couldn't say no. I owed him that much. Still, the thought of seeing my dad again made my stomach churn. What would I even say to him? Would he apologize? Pretend nothing had happened? I didn't know, but I decided I had to face it. Not for him, for Grandpa. Walking into Grandpa's 75th birthday party felt like stepping into a time capsule, but one filled with tension instead of nostalgia. The farmhouse he rented for the celebration was beautiful. A big open yard with string lights. folding chairs set up under a white tent and tables filled with homemade food. For anyone else, it probably looked like the perfect family gathering, but for me, it felt like a minefield. I hadn't seen my dad, Carol, or Ashley in for years, not since the day I was thrown out. As I parked my car and sat there staring at the entrance, I could already feel the lump forming in my throat. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but the invitation wasn't from them. It was from Grandpa. He'd always been the one person on my dad's side of the family who genuinely cared about me. I couldn't let my fear of seeing them ruin his big day. When I stepped inside, I immediately regretted not bringing a friend for moral support. The first people I saw were distant cousins and relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. A few smiled and waved, but most barely recognized me. I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong. But then I spotted Grandpa standing near the drinks table, chatting with one of his friends. He looked so happy. His face lit up with the kind of joy you only see on someone who's truly content. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, walking up to him. His face lit up even more when he saw me. "There's my girl," he said, pulling me into a big hug. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it, but I'm so glad you did." "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He squeezed my shoulder and introduced me to a few of his friends. For a little while I felt okay, even comfortable. I stuck close to him, avoiding the tables where my dad and Carol were sitting. I hadn't seen them yet, but I could feel their presence in the air, this invisible weight pressing down on me. Eventually, though, I couldn't avoid them any longer. It happened while I was grabbing a plate of food. I turned around, and there they were, my dad, Carol, and Ashley, sitting together at a table, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just seeing them again, it was how normal they looked. Like the last 4 years had been a vacation for them, while I'd been clawing my way back from rock bottom. My dad caught my eye first. His face froze for a moment like he wasn't expecting to see me. Then he quickly looked away, pretending I wasn't there. Carol glanced up, and when she saw me, her lips curled into that same smug smile she always wore, the one that made me want to scream. Ashley didn't even acknowledge me. She was too busy scrolling on her phone, acting like none of this had anything to do with her. I took a deep breath and walked away. I wasn't about to let them ruin this for me. Grandpa had been there for me when no one else was, and I wasn't going to let their presence make me forget that. Still, it was hard to focus on anything else. Every time I looked around, I caught glimpses of them. Out of the corner of my eye, my dad laughing with some Uncle Carol, whispering to one of the aunts. Ashley flipping her hair like she was still the queen of the world. It wasn't until Grandpa stood up to give his toast that things really started to unravel. "Thank you all for being here," he began, raising his glass. The crowd quieted down, everyone turning to listen. I feel so lucky to have lived 75 wonderful years, surrounded by such an incredible family. He went on for a bit, sharing stories about his childhood, his marriage to Grandma, and how proud he was of his kids and grandkids. It was sweet, and I could tell it meant a lot to him to have everyone there. But then his tone shifted. "There's one more thing I need to say," he said, his voice a little sharper now, something that's been weighing on my heart. The room went completely silent. I glanced around, and I wasn't the only one who looked confused. Grandpa set his glass down and took a deep breath. "A few years ago, my son James," he paused, looking directly at my dad, "lost a very important watch. A watch that meant a lot to him. At the time, it caused quite a bit of conflict in the family." My chest tightened. I could feel everyone's eyes turning toward me. My dad's face turned pale, and Carol stiffened in her seat. Ashley was frozen, her expression unreadable. I wanted to disappear, but recently, Grandpa continued. I found out what really happened to that watch. The tension in the room was unbearable. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. Grandpa reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. An old friend of mine runs a pawn shop. He said we were reminiscing about the good old days when he mentioned something that caught my attention. He told me about a very particular watch someone had brought in to sell a few years back. Turns out that someone was Ashley. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face went from pale to red in seconds. Carol's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Ashley just sat there, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Grandpa wasn't done. According to my friend, Ashley said she needed the money for car repairs after an accident she didn't want her father to know about. She told him she'd figure out a way to cover her tracks. And it seems she did by blaming someone else. All eyes were on Ashley now. My dad turned to her, his voice low and shaking. "Ashley, is this true?" She stammered, her face flushing. "I didn't mean." Carol jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. "James, she was young. She made a mistake." "A mistake!" Grandpa's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You destroyed someone's life over a mistake. You let this girl," he gestured toward me, "be kicked out of her home while you sat back and did nothing. That's not a mistake, Carol. That's cruelty." I couldn't stay. My head was spinning. My chest felt tight, and I could barely breathe without a word. I slipped out the door, leaving the chaos behind. I didn't want to see their reactions. I didn't want to hear the excuses or the justifications. I just needed to get out of there. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. After all these years, the truth was finally out, but it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt hollow. When I slipped out of Grandpa's party that night, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My emotions were all over the place: anger, sadness, relief, and something I couldn't even name. I didn't feel victorious. Even though the truth about the watch was finally out, if anything, I felt more lost than ever. The air outside was cool, and I stood there for a moment trying to catch my breath. I could still hear faint murmurs of conversation from inside the farmhouse, but I couldn't make out the words. My hands were shaking, and I gripped the keys in my pocket to steady myself. I just needed to leave. I climbed into my car and drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to go home and face the silence of my apartment. I thought I'd feel vindicated when the truth came out. For 4 years, I'd carried the weight of being falsely accused, and now everyone knew I wasn't the thief. But instead of feeling free, I just felt empty. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw a missed call from my dad, then another and another. By the time I pulled over to check my messages, he'd left 3 voicemails. I hesitated for a moment before hitting play. The first message started with his voice trembling. "I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it, but I guess I was wrong. Just call me back, please." The second was shorter, but more desperate. "I don't know how to fix this. I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Please?" The third one, though, took a different tone. "I can't believe you let Dad humiliate me like that in front of the whole family. You should have told me what he was planning. This isn't how families handle things. We need to talk." I stared at the phone in disbelief. He's blaming me after everything he put me through. After believing Ashley and Carol over me without a second thought, he had the nerve to act like I was the one who betrayed him. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started driving again, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, I woke up to more messages. My dad had sent a string of texts that ranged from apologizing to accusing me of turning Grandpa against him. Carol hadn't reached out, and neither had Ashley. Not that I expected them to, but hearing from my dad just made everything more confusing. What did he want from me? An apology? Forgiveness? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to face him. Grandpa called me later that day. His voice was calm but concerned, and I could tell he felt guilty about what happened at the party. "I'm sorry if I put you in an uncomfortable position," he said. "I thought it was time the truth came out, but I didn't mean to hurt you in the process. It's not your fault," I said quickly, and I meant it. "If it weren't for Grandpa, the truth might never have come out. I'm glad you said something. I don't know how to feel about any of it." He was quiet for a moment. "Take your time," he said. "You don't have to figure it all out right now, but just know whatever you decide, whether you want to talk to your dad or not, I'll support you." Hearing those words made me tear up. Grandpa had always been the one steady presence in my life, the one person who didn't make me feel like I was a problem to be solved. I thanked him and promised to visit soon, though I didn't know when I'd feel ready. In the days that followed, my dad's messages kept coming. At first, they were filled with apologies, promises to make things right, and pleas for me to meet with him. But as I kept ignoring them, his tone shifted. The texts became more accusatory, filled with lines like, "I don't know why you're shutting me out, and this isn't just about you. You're tearing the family apart." The family? What family? The one that threw me out like I was trash. The one that let Ashley and Carol walk all over me for years. I couldn't believe he had the audacity to frame it that way. Every message he sent just made me angrier, but I still couldn't bring myself to respond. I didn't know what to say, or maybe I just didn't think it would make a difference. As for Ashley and Carol, they stayed silent. I didn't hear a single word from either of them, which was fine by me. I didn't want their fake apologies or half-hearted excuses. They'd done enough damage, and I had no interest in giving them another chance to hurt me. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. A week after the party, I got a call from one of my cousins. She was always the family gossip, and she wasted no time filling me in on everything that had happened after I left. According to her, the party turned into a disaster the moment Grandpa finished his toast. My dad tried to defend Ashley, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, but Grandpa shut him down, saying there was no misunderstanding when it came to lying and stealing. Carol tried to play the victim, saying Grandpa had ruined the family's reputation by airing their dirty laundry in public, but no one was buying it. By the end of the night, most of the relatives were whispering about how Ashley and Carol had manipulated my dad for years and how he'd been blind to it. It was the first time in my life I'd felt like anyone on that side of the family actually saw the truth. My cousin also told me that Ashley had stormed out in tears, refusing to talk to anyone while Carol stayed behind, trying to do damage control. My dad apparently just sat there looking like he didn't know what to do. Hearing all of this should have made me feel better, like justice had finally been served, but instead, it just made me sad. Sad that it had taken this long for the truth to come out. Sad that my dad was only realizing now how much he'd screwed up. Sad that even with the truth out in the open, I still didn't feel like I'd gotten any closure. A few days later, my dad showed up at my apartment. He didn't call ahead or ask if I was home. He just knocked on the door like he had every right to be there. When I opened it and saw him standing there, I felt my chest tighten. He looked tired, older than I remembered, and his eyes had this desperate look in them that I didn't know how to process. "We need to talk," he said. I stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the door. Part of me wanted to slam it in his face, but another part of me, the part that still craved his approval, no matter how much I hated it, told me to hear him out. "Fine," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Talk." I stood there, gripping the edge of the door as my dad shuffled into my apartment. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the weight of everything that had happened had finally caught up to him. He didn't say anything at first, just glanced around my apartment like he was trying to place me in this new version of my life. I crossed my arms and waited, my stomach twisting into knots. "Nice place," he said awkwardly, finally breaking the silence. "Thanks," I replied flatly. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. Not after everything. "What do you want?" He looked at me like I just slapped him, but I didn't feel bad about it. He wasn't here to catch up or make small talk. He had a reason, and I wasn't going to let him dance around it. I came to apologize, he said, running a hand through his hair. I know I screwed up big time. I should have believed you. And I didn't. I let them convince me you were lying. And that was wrong. I stared at him, trying to gauge whether he actually meant it or if he was just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. It took you 4 years to figure that out. His shoulders sagged and he looked down at the floor. I know I was blind. I wanted to believe Carol and Ashley because it was easier than admitting that my family wasn't perfect. I didn't want to face the fact that they could lie to me like that. And I don't know, maybe I was afraid you'd turn out like your mom. There it was, the thing he always threw in my face. I felt my jaw tighten. You mean the mom you divorced and called crazy every chance you got? He winced but didn't argue. I know I said some things I shouldn't have about her. About you? I was wrong, and I see that now. You see it now? I shot back, my voice rising. It took Grandpa blowing up your perfect little bubble for you to even consider that maybe I wasn't the problem. Do you have any idea what it was like for me being thrown out, like I was nothing? And for what? A watch Ashley stole to fix her car. I know, he said quietly. I can't imagine how much that hurt you. I laughed bitterly. You can't imagine. You don't have to imagine, Dad. You lived it. You made it happen. He flinched, and for a moment I thought he was going to leave. Part of me hoped he would, but instead he took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. You're right, he said. I failed you as a father. I let you down when you needed me most, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the anger that had been eating at me for years. But another part of me, the part that still felt like a 17-year-old kid standing on the sidewalk with a duffel bag, couldn't let him off the hook so easily. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally. Not yet, anyway. He nodded like he expected that answer. I understand. I want to fix things if I can. I want to be part of your life again. I shook my head, frustration bubbling up inside me. You don't get to just walk back into my life and act like nothing happened. You let them ruin everything for me, and now you want to fix it. How? What could you possibly do to make up for 4 years of ignoring me? He didn't have an answer for that. He just stood there, looking lost and ashamed, and maybe that should have made me feel better, but it didn't. It just made me feel more empty. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I can't change what I did. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and hope you'll give me a chance to make things right. I stared at him for a long moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd felt all those years, but another part of me just felt tired. Tired of carrying the anger, tired of reliving the betrayal, tired of trying to figure out what I owed him, if I owed him anything at all. I need time, I said finally. I can't just let this go. I need to figure out where I stand with you. He nodded again, his face heavy with emotion. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, almost, but then I remembered all the nights I spent crying myself to sleep, all the times I begged him to listen to me, and the sympathy vanished. I think you should go, I said, stepping back toward the door. He hesitated like he wanted to say more, but then he nodded and walked past me. I'm sorry, he said again as he stepped out into the hallway, for everything. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it. my chest heaving with a mix of emotions I couldn't even name: relief, sadness, anger, closure. Maybe. I wasn't sure yet. In the days that followed, I started to process everything. Grandpa called to check in on me, and I told him about the conversation with my dad. He didn't try to push me one way or the other, just listened and let me vent. It helped more than I expected. My dad kept his promise and didn't contact me again, though I knew the door was open if I ever wanted to reach out. As for Ashley and Carol, I didn't hear a peep from them, and that was perfectly fine with me. I didn't need or want their apologies. About a week after my conversation with my dad, Grandpa called me over to his place. He sounded serious, almost grim, which wasn't like him at all. When I arrived, he had a stack of papers spread out on his coffee table. "I've been doing some digging," he said, "and what I found is worse than I thought." It turned out that Grandpa, in his frustration over the watch incident, had started going through old financial records for the family business. My dad, Carol, and Ashley had been living comfortably off family money for years, but something about the way they handled their finances had never sat right with him. What Grandpa discovered was shocking. Carol and Ashley hadn't just lied about the watch. They had been running a string of financial scams behind my dad's back for years. They'd siphoned money from the business accounts, taken out credit cards in my dad's name, and even racked up debt on loans he didn't know existed. The watch incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Grandpa explained that Ashley had a habit of spending money she didn't have, and Carol had been covering for her by moving funds around and hiding transactions. It wasn't just careless spending, it was deliberate fraud. Grandpa's voice was calm but firm as he laid it all out. "Your dad has no idea how much trouble they've gotten him into," he said, "and frankly, he's let them get away with it for too long." I was floored. I mean, I always knew Carol and Ashley were manipulative, but this was next level. Grandpa told me he had already consulted with his lawyer and decided to take drastic action. "Your father isn't responsible enough to handle the family legacy," he said, "and I'll be damned if Carol and Ashley get their hands on a single cent in one swift move." Grandpa disinherited my dad. Everything that was supposed to go to him. Money, property, trust, funds was being redirected. A significant portion was now going to me, which I didn't even know how to process. "I'm not doing this to punish your father," Grandpa said. "I'm doing it to protect you and the family's future. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." The fallout was immediate. Grandpa didn't waste any time putting his plan into action. And within days, my dad found out he had been cut off. The house they were living in, which Grandpa technically owned, was put on the market. My dad was given an ultimatum: he could stay in the house, but only if Carol and Ashley left. Predictably, my dad refused. Carol and Ashley were his family after all, and he couldn't imagine turning his back on them. So Grandpa followed through and began the process of evicting them. They had 30 days to vacate. The news sent Carol into a tailspin. She tried everything, begging, guilt-tripping, even threatening to sue Grandpa. But none of it worked. Grandpa's lawyer had made sure every loophole was closed, leaving Carol with no legal ground to stand on. Ashley, meanwhile, was spiraling with no money to fall back on. She was scrambling to pay off her debts. At one point, she even reached out to me, sending a long, rambling text about how sorry she was and how much pressure Carol had put on her. I didn't respond. She could blame Carol, all she wanted, but at the end of the day, Ashley was a grown adult who had made her own choices. She ruined my relationship with my dad and turned my life upside down. I didn't owe her anything. As for my dad, he was a mess. The man who had once been so sure of himself, so quick to judge and condemn me, was now on the verge of losing everything. He kept trying to contact me, alternating between apologizing and blaming Grandpa for turning me against him. I only responded once, but until you take full responsibility for what happened. "I don't want to hear from you," I wrote. "You made your choice when you believed Carol and Ashley over me. Now you have to live with it. I don't know if he'll ever truly understand how much he hurt me. Maybe he's too wrapped up in his own guilt to see the bigger picture. Or maybe he just doesn't care. Either way, I'm done trying to fix something that's so clearly broken. The one bright spot in all of this has been Grandpa. He's been my rock through everything, always reminding me that I'm not alone. We've gotten closer than ever, and he's made it clear that he wants to support me however he can. I can't undo what they did to you, he told me recently, but I can make sure you have the future you deserve. Hearing that means the world to me. For so long, I felt like I didn't matter to anyone. But now I know that's not true. The dust is still settling. My dad, Carol, and Ashley are out of the house and trying to figure out their next move. Carol filed for divorce, probably thinking she could get a big payout, but there's nothing left for her to take. Ashley has gone radio silent, which is fine by me. As for me, I'm finally at peace. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in years, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. Grandpa was right. They made their bed and now